All right. It is really good to be here with all of you. She looks familiar. I think that looks like me. Uh-oh, I think I better talk. No, I'm really happy to be here with you. I was in my hotel room last night, and I was looking out the window, I think at the office building right over here. And it was that time of day when that dusk time, when it's getting dark outside and the lights are on inside and you can see inside and watch what people are doing. That's one of my favorite times of day. Don't tell, because it sounds kind of creepy. But I was watching people work in the building across the way. And I was mesmerized and just kept staring because I thought, on the one hand, it's so familiar to see people in an office building working. And on the other hand, it's become so foreign. And so I just was so conflicted, like, I'm watching people work. It's so nice. It's so strange. Anyway, I am so happy to be here with you to talk about experiences I've had and how they might be able to help you as we all go into this future of work. And I actually want to start by talking about this picture. So this is the team at Tesla in June of 2012 when we released our first 10 Model S to customers. And so it was a big day of celebration, and as you can imagine, all of the engineers and the designers were being congratulated on the car that they designed. And the manufacturing team was being congratulated for producing that car. Well, there were some of us, those of us that were on the HR team, and we also were congratulating ourselves. Because as all of us in HR know, a team like this doesn't happen without us. So we are essential to the kind of success our companies have. And I'm somewhere in that picture, but I don't know exactly where, so I can't, somewhere in the back. But it was a really exciting day. And what I want to do is I want to share with you lessons that I learned at Tesla and lessons that I've learned at other times in my career with the hope that they can inspire you. But I actually want to start by asking you about you. And in particular, I want to know if any of you have felt like this. Yes? Yeah? Right? Particularly in the last couple of years. And there's good reason why we've felt like this. 2 years ago, people came to us and essentially with no notice said, we have to have everybody work from home. You have to make that happen. We said, okay, we don't know exactly how, but we'll do that. And then they've said, now we need to start bringing people back to work. We need to start having hybrid. And we're like, okay, but how do we do that? And on top of that, they're saying, but we've got all this resignation, and we have to take care of that. Or the skills are changing, and we have to take care of that. Right? All of these things. It's really normal for us to have our hair on fire. So if you're not the only HR person who has felt this way. We've all been feeling this way. And what we've been trying to do in response is essentially take the things that we've done in the past and squeeze them into this new way of working. And so we've tried to adapt. And when you think about adapting is taking what we've done in the past and slightly tweaking it, slightly modifying it to get it to work in our new normal. But there's a problem with that, which is that it's just constant small changes. And at some point we need to say, is it time actually for a big change instead of the tweaking? And this tweaking, though, that we've been doing has actually been going on in our workplaces for a long time. So the workplace that we have today is an adaptation of a workplace that started 100 years ago. So 100 plus years ago, people were farming, and we didn't have much manufacturing. But the first workplaces were manufacturing workplaces. And people were brought together to work together. And because of the way work was happening, everybody needed to start and stop at the same time. because they were working on a team. Their work was an assembly, perhaps, and so their work was dependent on everybody else. There was a very specific way you needed to do your job. We needed supervisors and managers to watch over you, to make sure you did things that specific way. And that made sense for the workplace 100 years ago. But fast forward to today, when many of our jobs are in offices that don't look anything like a factory, and yet we still are doing work in a way that has been adapted from this. So we're still saying to people, you need to start at a certain time and end on a certain time, even though that really can be more flexible. Or we're saying, managers, your job is to supervise and control how people are doing things. When in fact, nowadays, the best ideas might be coming from the employees themselves, and they don't need that level of supervision. So it's really time for us to say, what if the workplace were invented today? What would it look like? What if we went back to a blank sheet of paper and basically said, let's figure this out now? And if we did this, by the way, we would probably say, what are all of the conditions we need? And what's all the technology that's available? And when do people really need to be together? And when do people work best on their own? But we would be free of all of the constraints that come with tweaking and adapting. So we might have some of the same conclusions, but we end up starting from a real different place and not being constrained. Let me give you a couple examples of what happens when you start with a blank sheet of paper. And the first place that I encountered this was when I was working at Apple. So I was working at Apple about 2003 to 2008, and what was really significant about the time I was working at Apple is this is when we launched this little device called the iPhone. Little device, right? So that we call the iPhone. And when you think about the iPhone, how was this developed? And at the time, Apple had this device, the iPod, with the click wheel, all right? And people really liked the click wheel. And people kept saying, Apple, we love your iPod, we love your click wheel, do a phone, do a phone. And when people would say do a phone, they would say, think about the BlackBerry. Oops, wrong button. There we go. Think about the BlackBerry. In business, people love their BlackBerry, right? In fact, they had a different term for it, Crackberry, right? I think we probably all remember that too. But people loved their BlackBerries, and so they said, Apple, do a phone, maybe one that combines iPod and BlackBerry. Maybe it has an iPod at top and then a keyboard at the bottom, or they gave all of these different ideas. And some people even would submit drawings that would say, look, here's how a click wheel can be made into a phone. And so all these ideas coming up. Steve Jobs even joked in a presentation once that maybe it would look something like this, an iPod meets a phone. But we all actually know what ended up happening, which was none of these ideas. It wasn't about adapting an iPod. It wasn't about adapting a BlackBerry. Instead, it was asking a question like this: if the mobile phone were invented today, what would it look like? And at the time, apps were emerging. And so what Apple did, as we all know, is they produced a phone that looked like this, that had nothing to do with what was on the market. And when this first came out, people said, business people will never want this phone. They're not going to like not having a physical keyboard. This will never work. How many of you today are carrying around an iPhone, right? It worked. So this was the iPhone, and it started with this idea of rethinking everything, going to that blank sheet of paper and saying, based on what's available today, what's the right answer? Funny story. So I was in New York City when iPhone was launched. There was a whole leadership team that was there, and I was there. And so this was the first release to the whole world. And we were up all night working on this release. And finally, in the hotel the next morning, We're all getting together for breakfast. Some of us were a little hungover more than others, but we were getting together for breakfast and sharing stories about the night of iPhone launch. And we all got iPhones that very first day. And somebody said, the funniest thing happened at dinner. We're like, what? She said, I looked around the table at one point and everybody was down on their phones. And we all laughed and we thought it had to do with the fact that the phone was so new and everybody was excited by the new. Little did we know that everybody was going to be doing this forevermore. But this behavior started that very first night. I don't know that we should be proud of that, but it still is true. So I also saw this way of thinking, of redoing everything, rethinking everything, when I was at this company, which we all know is Tesla. Now, Tesla's first car was the Roadster. Pretty beautiful car, right? So this car was 100% electric, and it had long range. But what was interesting about this car is this car was not entirely built by Tesla. So what happened was Tesla got the body for the car from Lotus in the UK. It actually was the same as the Lotus Elise, for those of you who are car people. And it was modified to be electric. So it's everything I was saying before about adapting. So because it was modified to be electric, the engineers had to say, how should we configure the battery pack so it can fit into this space? And all these other kinds of components, all of their thinking was constrained by the form factor, by the car that they were starting with. But then came the second car that Tesla was creating, and this was the Model S. And unlike Roadster, Model S was starting from the ground up by Tesla, so from this blank sheet of paper. And this way of rethinking everything was so core to who Tesla was that they even wrote it on the factory wall. So here's what happened. Tesla was getting ready to release Model S, and for about 3 years, customers had been putting down $5,000 as a deposit for this car. And they really had never seen the car, they had never touched the car, but they still were giving $5,000 as a deposit. And we were late. And we were later. And then we were even later than that. And the press was saying, they're never going to do it. These people who gave their money were stupid. They're going to lose all that money. They're never going to do it. Well, we at Tesla knew we were making progress. We were late, but we were making progress. And so we said, we've got to open up our factory and invite in the press and invite in the first 1,000 people who have reservations so they can see the progress that we are making. And so here's a picture from the factory from around those days. And I remember walking down to the factory when we were getting ready for this big opening and seeing this written on the factory wall. And this is actually a picture of the wall. But it said, your Model S started with a blank slate and the challenge to rethink everything. And I looked at that and I went, yes, that's it. That's what we're doing at this company. We're willing to rethink everything. And it was so much of kind of our secret sauce, our special power. Because what was happening by being able to rethink everything is it allowed the engineers to say, where should the battery go? We can put it anywhere we want. We're not constrained. Where should it go? And traditional thinking would be to put it where the engine is. But they said, we don't have to think traditionally. We're not adapting. We're going from a blank sheet of paper. And they said, the battery is heavy, it's large, so where should it go? And somebody had the idea that it should go like a skateboard underneath the car. Not where an engine went. Where an engine went wasn't relevant, right? Underneath the car. And what this did was all kinds of things. The battery pack was heavy, so it gave the car a low center of gravity, which also made it a very safe car because that helped to reduce the rollover risk. The other thing, we don't think about this often, but when you've got an engine in front of you in the car as a driver. If you're in a front-end collision, there is a chance that that engine is going to come into the cabin of the car where you are. Well, this took away that risk and created instead a very large crumple zone, so that all that's happening is the car is crumpling, but nothing is coming into the cabin, again, making the car safer. So this idea, not based on the old way, 100% new way, and made the car better. There was also a question about how should technology be used? So this again is 2009, 2010, 2011. How should technology be used? And at the time, everybody was used to having technology in their phones that would get software updates, and then they would wake up and go, oh, I've got new features on my phone. Some I like, some I don't like, but I've got new features on my phone. Or your computer, oh, I got a software update. Well, Tesla also said, 2010, 11, 12, why shouldn't we have a computer run the car and essentially control everything in the car, which, by the way, would mean that the car could now get software updates, which means unlike a traditional car that's best day is the day you drive it off the lot, a Tesla can get better after you bought it. Who ever heard of such a thing? Right? But this is what happens when you start with a blank sheet of paper and you allow yourself to rethink everything and say, based on what's available in the world today, how should we solve this problem? And this way of thinking wasn't just about the big things. It was about little things too. So some small elements like, where should a charge port go? Traditional thinking, adapting would say, well, we all have that flap on the car that we open and then we put in the gas hose. So isn't that where the just battery? Like, no. First of all, there's nothing attractive about that flap. It interferes with aerodynamics. So what if instead we hide the charge port behind a side light in the car? So when you need it, boop, that side light opens up. You plug in, you don't need it, boop, it gently closes, and you can't even see it, and it doesn't affect the aerodynamics. Or what about a key? Can't the key fob be cute and charming and fit in your hand and look like your car? Right? So rethinking everything. That's what we were doing. And the result, from the day it was launched, Tesla was 5-star crash test rated in every category. From the day it launched, it was the safest car on the planet. And that very first year it launched, it was awarded Motor Trend's Car of the Year. So one of the things both Apple and Tesla believed when they were doing this way of thinking wasn't that they were trying to make a product that was as good as what was available. They basically were saying, how can we use this opportunity to make a product that is better? Let's think about the future of work. How can we take this opportunity, rethink everything, and make our workplaces better than they've ever been? Because when we think about the future of work, it's our turn. It's our turn to be the ones to go back to that blank sheet of paper and say, what should the workplace look like? And you've had all kinds of ideas coming to you today, whether it's the ideas that Nick shared or Arnold or some of the things we heard even at the top of the day from Bora, right, about what's happening in the world and what people want. So how do we put that all together and think in these new ways? Now I know what you're thinking. Beth, be honest. Those were engineers that came up with all those good ideas. We aren't engineers. We're HR. Well, are we not creative? Are we not innovators? We are. And again, I know it because I've lived it. So when I was at Tesla, the Tesla team, the HR team, we had to innovate everything that we were doing about HR. We couldn't just do things the normal, typical ways. Let me give you some context for why that was. So this was the employee growth at Tesla, both while I was there, a little bit before, and then after. So Actually, 2009 was right after Roadster went on the market, but Model S hadn't yet come out. And you could see that there were 600 people at the company. When I joined the company in 2011, there were 850 people in the company. When I left in 2017, we had 33,000 people. So in the 6 years that I was there, we went from 800 to 33,000. They've continued to grow without me. I don't know how they've done that. No, but they've continued to grow without me, and now are somewhere near 100,000 people. This is a company that didn't exist 20 years ago. Over 100,000 people today. Not only that, but the product line has greatly changed. So Tesla has gone from having just the Roadster to having Roadster, Model S, Model 3, and Model X, but also has more automotive products on the horizon. So they've announced a Semi, as we call it in the US, so a big tractor trailer. They've announced a new Roadster, and then the Cybertruck, which is a pickup truck. So a whole fleet of vehicles. Before I go on, I want to mention, traditional automotive releases a new car. Their ramp-up time is every 7 years. So this idea, too, of rethinking everything has allowed the company to operate at a whole different pace than the rest of the industry. Because I just mentioned to you, 6 or 7 different cars. In traditional automotive, that's 40 years worth of work. This has been about 10 years of work at Tesla. But in addition to automotive, Tesla also has energy products like battery storage and has solar products like solar panels and is developing solar roofs. So it has gone to a full suite of products. And I don't need to tell you that this type of employee growth and product growth puts tremendous pressure on all of us in HR. And that's why we needed to be thinking differently about what we were doing. And I'm going to share with you 5 key areas where we thought differently: hiring, culture, policies, new hire orientation, and retention. Let's start with hiring. So now the first thing you might be thinking about hiring is Tesla. Come on, it had to be easy to hire at Tesla, right? Isn't it easy for a company like Tesla to attract the brightest, the most talented people that it needs? Well, especially if you go back in time, the answer to this actually is no. It wasn't, especially in those early days, easy for Tesla to attract talent. And think about why this is. If you just go back to 2009, 2010, Tesla was a startup that nobody heard of. And it's very hard to attract talent to a company that people haven't heard of. It also was hard because those who did hear of it were saying it would never work. It takes a lot of people and a lot of money to start a car company. Plus, this idea of electric cars had been tried before. You could go back to Thomas Edison. That's him here. And he had tried in the early 1900s to make a car that was battery powered. Of course, it didn't have much range, and it wasn't the right answer, but he tried. It failed. That doesn't mean people gave up. You could go to the 1960s. I love this car. I've never seen this car except in this picture, but I think it's so cute. But, right, so here, this is from Renault, and it was a electric car that they tried in the 60s. Again, hasn't really been seen because it didn't succeed. People didn't stop trying, though. In the 1970s, we had this car, the city car. I think this one kind of destroyed the reputation of electric cars. I'm not going to call this one cute, but people were trying. They still sold over 4,000 of these. So there are plenty of people out there who've wanted an electric car, but it failed. So it's not a surprise that when Tesla announced in 2006 that it was working on electric cars, that people said, good luck, you too will likely fail. But we all know that that's not quite what happened. The other problem we had with recruiting is that we were competing with giants. So in the automotive sector, because of course we needed people with experience in automotive, we were competing for that talent with Honda, Ford, GM. You recognize these logos. We also needed a lot of people who were engineers and comfortable with technology, and we had big competitors there as well. Facebook, Google, Apple, right? So big competitors. These folks have a reputation for paying big bucks for talent, and oftentimes winning the war for talent with money. Tesla, on the other hand, had a budget that looked a little bit more like this. So we did not pay top dollar for all of our talent. In fact, for years, it was known that if you came to Tesla, you probably took a pay cut to join the company. We were a startup. We didn't have that kind of money. We did give people stock options. So that was good. So, right, so it helped to align people and get them excited about stock options. But stock options are only going to be valuable if the company succeeds. And again, everybody was saying we were going to fail. So potentially those stock options weren't going to be worth anything. Guess what? They ended up being worth a lot. But at the time, we didn't know that. So how did Tesla, in fact, attract all of this talent? And it's similar to what Nick was talking about in his presentation. He talked about purpose. At Tesla, our purpose was really summed up in our mission. So we had a powerful mission that attracted talent. And that mission was to accelerate the world's transition to sustainable transportation. And it was this mission that drew people in. Because all over the world, you could find pictures like this. This is Taiwan. I am not picking on Taiwan. I can find pictures like this everywhere. But we all know what is happening with our climate, heavily driven by smog. And so there is a real need for sustainable transportation. So this mission was powerful, not because it talks about making beautiful cars. It doesn't even talk about making beautiful cars. We were doing that. It doesn't even talk about making the most technologically advanced cars, even though we were doing that. It's about something bigger. It was about doing work that could really help our entire planet. Work where you would know that there was a legacy that you were leaving after spending time at Tesla. And so this mission attracted people who wanted to work on the best cars coming, and wanted to work on new technology, and wanted to work on sustaining the planet. So we did, in fact, end up with quite a bit of applicants. So how did we choose? How did we hire among those applicants? And here we did things, again, differently. We played by our own rules. But what we did that was really different was we said the typical approach to hiring is to look at skills and knowledge. What skills does somebody have? What knowledge do they have? And basically, we've said oftentimes that the top candidate is going to have the top skills and the top knowledge for the job. And what we recognized at Tesla was that this wasn't, in fact, the magic formula, that there was a third piece that was more important than skills and knowledge. And that third piece was mindset, how the person thinks. Because what we recognize is that if you don't have the skills and don't have the knowledge, we can teach you that part. We can't teach you the mindset. And all day today, we've been hearing a lot of things that have to do with mindset. Things like being a lifelong learner, things like having a growth mindset, or recognizing that the world is going to evolve and we need to evolve with it, right? So mindset was the big differentiator. And we knew mindset was really important inside Tesla because we knew we were working really long hours and we were working really fast, and we had to have people who also were going to be like that. So they had to have a mindset to persevere. They had to have a mindset that was comfortable with ambiguity, because one day we might be going this way, or we're going to learn that it was wrong and we were going to shift and go another way, and so we needed that type of comfort with ambiguity. So how do you find out what somebody's mindset is? Well, the same way we find out about other things. Not everything is different when you rethink everything. We interviewed for it, right? So we used the skills we had for interviewing, and we interviewed it. And there were 2 questions that every candidate was asked, whether you were joining the manufacturing team, whether you were joining the executive team. 2 questions every candidate was asked. And the first one was, why Tesla? Why Tesla? And there wasn't one right answer. But there was enough being written about the company at this point that you should have some answer to this question. And if you couldn't answer this at all, you're probably just looking for a job. And we were working way too hard for somebody who's just looking for a job. So a good answer to this question could be about technology. It could be about automotive. It could be about sustainable energy. It could be about any of those. But we just wanted to know that you had some intrinsic motivation that was going to help you through the challenges that you were going to experience. Intrinsic motivation so that even if somebody wasn't looking over your shoulder, you were going to do the right thing. The other question was, tell me about your most significant accomplishment. Now, we had some employees who'd been Olympic athletes, so maybe this was easy for them to answer. And we had some who were inventors, so maybe it was easy for them to answer. But we had a lot of people who weren't Olympic athletes or who weren't inventors, but they still could tell us about whether it was a work accomplishment that they had or something in their personal lives, something they helped their children do or their church do or their community do. But what was important here is it's very easy to start something. It's very hard to finish because obstacles get in your way. And what we wanted to know is that we were bringing in people who could see things through to the end, right? Who could overcome those obstacles, persevere, and take something to the end. So we wanted to know that they were achievers, people who could accomplish. So mindset was the first thing we focused on around hiring. The other thing we focused on was impact. Earlier today, Borja called it value, which I think is another really good way to think about it. I may end up changing this later, but when you think about impact. I also want to point out this is, I think, our 4th 2x2 grid that we've seen today. So like all good presentations, I must have a 2x2 grid. But what this one is saying is that when you think about people, and on one level you put level of specialization, on one axis, level of specialization. So on the low side, anybody could do it. On the high side, very specialized skills. And on the other axis, we get value or impact, from low value and low impact to high. And what we said was, if you look at these, you can almost plot every job onto this grid. And so in this lower left hand, you get people who are cogs, low level of specialization, low impact. They're just in there doing their job. Doing what I was told to do, doing my job. Above that, so in the upper left-hand corner, I have to keep my left and my right correct. In the upper left-hand corner, you get still people with a low skill level, but they're driven to make an impact. And so they're still problem solving and going, I may be working on an assembly line or working in production, but I still am somebody who wants to make an impact by finding ways to do things better, finding ways to do things faster, calling out quality defects when I see them because I want to make sure our product is top-notch, right? So similar to the cogs, but adding value. If we go to the top right, we have our unicorns. These are people with specialized skill. They bring them to the table, and they add value in some really unique ways. And then we have this unusual category in the lower right, highly specialized, but unable to add impact. And sometimes it's not because of them. It might be that it's somebody highly specialized that we hired too soon. We may have said, oh, we met somebody. They've got highly specialized skills. We think we'll need them in the future. Let's bring them in today. But the problem is that person, we're not ready for them, so they get bored. And then they start coming up with projects that distract rather than add. Or sometimes, too, these might be people that we say, well, every other company hired somebody like this, so we probably need it too, but we don't really know what to do with them. So what was our hiring strategy for each of these positions or each of these kinds of roles? Well, the ones that are in that lower right hand, highly specialized, but we don't need them yet, we didn't hire them. We would use our recruiting team to keep them warm, to keep in contact with them, to keep telling them how much we respect and admire them, but we wouldn't hire them yet. We also wouldn't hire, you probably could guess it, we didn't hire these folks that I'm going to call the cogs. Because what we found here is that when you hire folks who are just doing the minimum, they actually set your standard. Because the people around them who are working really hard at some point go, wait a moment, why am I working so hard when this person next to me who has the same job is barely doing anything? So these people would lower our standards, and so we didn't hire them. So you could see we really focused above that middle line, and we focused on impact, people who could come in and make impact. So those were our two hiring strategies, hire mindset and hire for impact. A little bit different, perhaps, than what others were doing. All right, so then the next thing that we spent some time rethinking, going to a blank sheet, was culture. Because what we recognize is that when you are growing as fast as Tesla was growing, as fast as Tesla even continues to grow, your culture becomes at risk. Everybody who comes in thinks they know the best way to do things, thinks they've got the right way to do things. But what we wanted to do was say, wait, there's something about the way we're operating, the way that we're getting things done that's unique. That's our secret powers. And we don't want to lose those secret powers as we grow. And so the first thing we did is we said, we have got to preserve the culture we have today while we're growing. Oh, wait, before we can preserve it, we better define it. So we said, what is this culture? Let's define it. And to define it, we brought together the core team that had been working at the company when the Roadster was first being developed. And this core team was working out of a house in Menlo Park, California. I don't want to work out of that house. That does not look very, very appealing. It was rather chaotic, right? You can see in the picture, right? They were working out of this house in this very chaotic environment. But in spite of those conditions, they were solving some really difficult problems, like how do you get liquid to cool lithium ion so you can actually use lithium ion batteries in a car? And how do you get that car to have hundreds of miles, hundreds of kilometers of range so that it would be something that people would desire? And they were also doing crazy things like, oh my gosh, we need a prototype and we need it for tomorrow and it needs to be heated, and running out to a hardware store and buying a typical oven, not an industrial oven, to heat that part. And they're like, look, it might ruin the oven, but we only need it to work for one night. And heating up that part to create that prototype overnight. So we pulled this group together and we said, what is it? What is it about the way you're working, the way you're operating, the way you're solving problems that makes us so unique, that allows us to do what others is saying is impossible? What is that? And they wrote it down. And they came up with these 6 statements. Competitive to be the best in everything we do. No fear of solving hard problems ourselves. Entrepreneurial and scrappy. Minimal bureaucracy, just get it done. Efficient and sustainable. And work hard, love what we do, and have fun. Now these may look like values. Okay, let's see, you guys had a chance. Okay, now you guys can have a chance. Okay, these may look like values, but they're actually quite different than values. Because values oftentimes are aspirational. They're who we want to be. These were who we were. These were what we wanted to preserve. And because it was who we were already, we had lots of stories that we could share with people where we could say, here's this impossible problem, and I want to show you how these came together to solve that problem. And soon I'll share with you one of those stories, but you just have to hold on a couple more minutes. So this was our culture. And defining the culture was really important for us. And I want you to notice that when you think about culture as I've defined it, it's not about coffee breaks. It's not about in Silicon Valley, companies will have beer bashes. You know, Friday night, let's bring out the beer, or, oh, we can have our dogs in the workplace. Those are perks. And perks are nice, but they aren't culture. Culture is how we think, how we operate, how we make decisions. And this is really important for this new world of work, because when we think about our virtual workplaces, how we think, how we operate, how we make decisions, we can make that work in a virtual place. We may not be able to have virtual beer bashes, but that's okay, that was a perk. But if we say we think in ways that are inclusive, minimal bureaucracy, we can still do minimal bureaucracy with a virtual workplace. So culture is how we think and how we operate. All right, the third thing we did is we rethought policies. Sometimes we don't think enough about the policies we've created and how much they are getting in the way of the results that we want. So for instance, we may say we want a culture that's very trusting, and oh, we trust people. And then we give them a big book of rules, right? Here's all our policy. We trust you, but be sure you do this, and don't do this, and don't do that, and right? And it's like, well, how do you trust? What is that? So we actually said we wanted to make sure our policies were consistent with this culture that we had defined. So there was a project, I remember the day clearly. The head of HR came to me and said, I want you to look at our employee handbook and make sure our employee handbook supports and is consistent with our culture. And so I picked up the employee handbook, and it was 56 pages long. And it said at the beginning, this handbook is for you. It's to help you be successful here. Okay, that's good. And then it said, in California, this is an employment at will state, which means we can fire you at any time for any reason. And then it went on for 55 pages with all these laws and rules and regulations. I was like, all right, well, guess what? The first sentence is good, but the other 56 pages, right, we needed to get rid of. Now, so what did we do? So we said, why don't we instead do what that first sentence is saying? This is for you to help you be successful here. And why don't we write that document? And so we did. And we wrote a 3.5-page handbook that we called the anti-handbook handbook. Now, in the US, we aren't required to have an employee handbook. I know some countries, I don't know about for you, some countries are required to have a handbook. This probably wouldn't qualify. So we had the anti-handbook handbook. And I know this is hard for you guys to read, but I'm going to at least read for you the first 5 paragraphs. So it said, we're Tesla. We're changing the world. We're willing to rethink everything. We're a high-tech company unlike any other high-tech company. We're a car company unlike any other car company. We're different, and we like it that way. Being different allows us to do what no one else is doing, to do what others tell us is impossible. If you're looking for a traditional employee handbook filled with policies and rules, you won't find one. Policies and rules tell you where the bottom is. They tell you how poorly you can perform before you get shown the door. That's not us. We prefer to have incredibly high standards and to hire exceptional people who enjoy pushing themselves to perform at the highest levels every day. We want to surround ourselves with people driven to do the right things and act with integrity even when no one else is looking. Is this you? If so, we're glad you're here, and we look forward to doing amazing things together. If this isn't you, you'll be more successful somewhere else. We don't mean to sound harsh, it's just the truth. And then we went on to say, here are some of our high standards. Here's what trust means. Here's how we communicate, et cetera, et cetera. And so this is what we were driven to do around policies. Create this environment that everybody could actually perform at their best, be those exceptional people we hired them to be. The other thing we did is we spent time at orientation talking about these things. And I'm going to say, I think orientation, new hire orientation, at many companies Maybe yours, you don't have to tell me, but I think orientation at many companies is a missed opportunity. Because we've got people who are really excited. They have made the decision to join your company, to join our company. They're really excited. They also, though, are a little bit confused, right? Did I make the right decision? What is this company really? How do they work? How do they operate? Will I be successful here? Essentially, they come in disoriented. So if you think about orientation, well, orientation's the opposite of disorientation. So our job in orientation is to get rid of this disorientation. It's to answer questions like, who are we? How do we operate? What does it take to be successful here? And to confirm for people that they made the right decision to join this company. So that's what we did at New Hire Orientation. Not paperwork. We found other ways to do the paperwork. And we spent time in orientation talking about our culture. And so how did we do this? How did we focus New Hire Orientation on culture? Well, we started by talking about the mission. And I already shared with you what the mission was, right? But we started here to, again, remind people, this is why we're here. This is why we're doing what we're doing. We also were very transparent with all levels, all jobs, about what our challenges were for that coming quarter. Because remember, this was a startup. And every quarter, our life was at risk. If we didn't hit those quarterly goals, we frankly really could cease to exist. So for instance, in Q4 of 2012, our goals were to deliver our first 10 production cars, but also by the end of the quarter to be at a rate of 500 cars. So we're trying to go from the beginning of the quarter at 10 cars to the end of the quarter at 500 cars. That really helped people understand why we were working so hard in every role. And then we also talked about achieving 25% gross margin, and we would talk about what gross margin was to everybody in the company. Oftentimes people in manufacturing roles, particularly, would come up to us and say, thank you. Nobody has ever really respected my intelligence and allowed me to be a partner in the business the way that you have, the way that Tesla has. We also took them on a tour of the factory because the factory was pretty kick-ass, and we wanted them to see it so that they really could get excited about the company that they were joining. But if we thought the factory was kick-ass, I hope it's okay that I keep saying kick-ass, the car was even better. And so we also took them on rides in the car because the car was expensive. It still is pretty expensive. And so most people had never ridden in one. And so we would take them for a ride in the car and get them to be thrilled by what we were doing. And then, of course, we shared the cultural tenets that I shared with you, and we told lots and lots of stories that helped bring these to life. So here's one of those stories. So thank you for your patience before when I said I would tell you one. And this one has to do with a press line. So those of you in manufacturing probably recognize a press line. It takes a flat part of metal, presses it, and forms it into a new shape. And most cars are made out of steel, and most of these have a mechanical press line as a result. On Tesla, we needed the body of our car to be made out of aluminum. And we needed it to be out of aluminum so that it would be lighter weight, and as a result, not be a drag on range. But having an aluminum body means you need a hydraulic press line. So we needed a press line that looked like this. This is a Schuler press line, and one of these new would have been about $42 million. Well, we didn't have $42 million. But what we did have, lucky for us, was we were in the middle of the recession at the time. And so our team went out and they found one of these used for $10 million. So 20% of the price. The problem was that it was in Michigan, which was clear across the country from where the factory was going to go in California. I think that's about 3,000 kilometers. And this thing was so big that to take it apart, it would need to go on about 300 tractor cars to pull it across the country. So we reached out to different vendors and different suppliers and said, can you help us? We need to tear this down, ship it across the country, and set it up on the other side. And they said, well, no. Or they said, well, yeah, but it's going to take 9 months. And we said, we don't have 9 months. We've got 3 months. And they were like, yeah, no. And so Tesla said, well, that's OK. We'll figure it out ourselves. And we did. And 3 months later, this is what that press line looked like in California, even put into a slightly different sequence, given a fresh coat of paint. But we had that press line, and we had it. And by the way, it is as deep underground as it is tall above ground. This thing is massive. So you can see, though, from this story, the cultural tenets in action. So no fear of solving hard problems ourselves, the second one on the list, right? Others said no. We're like, fine, we'll still do it. Competitive to be the best in everything we do. We weren't willing to give up on using aluminum. We were like, well, I guess we'll have to use steel. Like, no, we wanted aluminum. Minimal bureaucracy. The people who were solving this, they just did it. They didn't worry about getting everybody's approval. They just did it. And by the way, work hard, love what you do, have fun. That isn't always about beer and cookies or whatever. Like, when you solve a really hard problem and you've worked collaboratively to do it, that is so much fun and so rewarding that people would say, oh my God, are you kidding? Those crazy days were my most fun days. So this is the kind of story where you could see the culture in action. And we had these stories from the sales team. We had these stories from the manufacturing team. We had them from the engineering teams, right, all through the company. And we, in orientation, would share these stories so that people could understand what we meant by competitive to be the best in everything you do, or no fear of solving hard problems. So that's what we did in orientation. The last thing I'm going to talk about pretty quickly is retention. What did we do for retention? Because if you're bringing in this many people and you're investing this much in getting them up to speed, and you're still hiring a lot more, you don't want people leaving as fast as you're hiring them. You're never going to get caught up. So we had to focus on retention. Well, one of the things that we recognized about retention is that assuming you're paying people fairly, and I already said we weren't paying people top, but we were paying fairly. Right? So as long as you're paying people fairly, people worry about retention when they think company A, B, C, and D all essentially look the same. They're interchangeable. And if the companies are, in fact, interchangeable, then why wouldn't I leave company A to go to company B if company B is going to give me a little bit more money? But we knew that this wasn't true. Companies aren't interchangeable. And if your company is more unique, then people going to leave it have a risk, which is they may say, I may make a little bit more money. But there's something unique here, something about the culture, the way we're working together, the way we operate as a team, the way we're respected, that I might not be able to find that in another company. And for a little bit more money, I'm not going to risk it. And so it comes down to many of the things that we've already been talking about. We had a mission you couldn't find anywhere else. And it wasn't, by the way, just the executives that were motivated by this mission. I was going through the factory one day, and I saw a woman who was working in the factory. And she said to me, Beth, we're doing it. We're doing it. And I'm like, oh, yeah, what are we doing? I mean, what? And she's like, we're changing the world. We're driving the world's transition to sustainable transportation. I think this might be right after we had gotten that Motor Trend Award. And this is somebody who every day was installing the dashboard in the car. Every day, her job, right, the same thing every day. And she still was motivated by this mission because she knew that she was doing work that mattered. We also had a culture that couldn't be found anywhere else. And so again, there's a risk. You can go to another company, but it might not have minimal bureaucracy like we have, so your ideas might not be appreciated or heard as much, and so there's a risk. And then we also, of course, had that stock I told you about before. And what the stock did, even if you weren't convinced that we were going to succeed, what the stock still did was it made us one team. Because if the company succeeded, we all succeeded. It wasn't just that a couple top executives were going to succeed. We all were going to succeed. And so it pulled us together as a team. And so this made us unlike any other company. and it really helped us with retention. Now, I will say, you may notice by my story, I'm not at Tesla anymore. And there's also a lot of people out there, a lot of people I know, who aren't at Tesla anymore. And so this isn't about necessarily keeping everybody. So there came a time in the company's growth where it frankly was no longer the right company for me. I like to be at a small company where, with small teams, where you kind of are wearing a lot of hats, even though my job may have said I was in charge of learning and development, which is what my job title said. I still got to do things like write an employee handbook. That had nothing to do with my job. Or I still got to do help out with other projects in other ways. As the company grew and grew, my role, just by virtue of the company growing, was getting narrower and narrower. And that just no longer made it the right place for me. But I still was able to leave the company with a high sense of pride. I still love the company, you may know. Yes, I do own a Tesla, right? So even though there may come a time that we're going to part ways, we can still part ways in a way that has a lot of respect and dignity behind it, that honors that time we spent together. So these are the ways that we rethought everything. So now why have I been sharing these with you? Let's go back to future of work. And what I said to you at the beginning, which is this is HR's turn to rethink everything. It's our turn to reinvent. And we might not do it the way that I just shared with you in these stories, but at least it shows you in these stories that yes, HR can be creative. HR doesn't have to be tied to doing things the way they've always been done. And we can look at things and say, like for instance, let's suppose for a moment that the world of work didn't exist until today. And I were to say to you, how should we invent it? Wouldn't you tell me it should be hybrid? Wouldn't you look and go, well, all this technology exists. Of course, for many roles, we should have them sometimes coming together for all of the power that that collaboration brings, but also, too, it probably should have time that people are out on their own. That would make sense. And we can use technology in these ways, but we probably don't need to use technology to be hovering over people, because maybe we did that in the workplace, but that's not necessary, right? So we would invent the world differently. And that's the challenge for all of us. And my hope today was to inspire you to embrace the world we're sitting in today, the one that has our hair on fire, and say, all right, it's our turn. Let's rethink everything, and let's invent this future of work together. And that, my friends, is what I wanted to share with you.